Introduction. The war that never ends. The age of democracy was once the age of contemplation. The public square was a place of discourse, where the mind sharpened itself against the iron of debate, where words had weight and meanings were anchored in reality. But that world is gone. Now democracy is not a system of governance, but a battlefield of narratives, where truth is neither won nor lost, only weaponized. The lines between state and faith, commerce and salvation, are erased and redrawn as needed. The gods of the old world were silent judges, their wisdom written in sacred texts. The gods of the new world are fluid, shifting with the tides of public sentiment, dictated by those who control the language, the currency, and the hunger of the people. This book is a chronicle of how a civilization destroys itself not through war, but through the slow erosion of meaning. We have built a society where theocracy and capitalism are two sides of the same coin. Faith is leveraged to enforce control, and control is disguised as faith. Neo-Marxist theology preaches revolution not against kings and oligarchs, but against the very concept of order itself. What was once religion has been refashioned into ideology, an ideology that breeds demons not from hell, but from the very souls of the people. The masses are infected, not with hunger for truth, but with hunger for consumption. The citizens become parasites, not of an oppressive state, but of their own undoing, feeding on whatever they can grasp: money, faith, power, or destruction itself. They are desperate to consume, yet never satisfied. This hunger is not natural, it is designed, manufactured by those who benefit from chaos, those who know that a world in constant motion is a world that never stops to question who is pulling the strings. And so democracy does not die, it mutates, it shifts into a new form, one where its people either dissolve into perpetual revolution, or embrace the only alternative, a final, desperate submission to extreme capitalism, where freedom itself becomes a commodity, bought and sold until nothing remains. This is the world we live in, a world where reality itself bends under the weight of contradiction, where every moment is a struggle between narratives, and where the choice is no longer between right and wrong, but between being devoured or becoming the devourer. Welcome to the war that never ends. When truth is no longer the foundation but the weapon. There was a time when truth was fixed, when the Logos, the divine principle of order, reason, and meaning, was the foundation of civilization. It was the spoken word that carved reality from chaos, the law that restrained both tyrants and mobs, the axis upon which all understanding turned. Whether through divine scripture, philosophy, or law, society once anchored itself in the idea that words had meaning, that facts could be discovered, that truth, however elusive, was something to be pursued. That time is gone. Now truth is no longer the foundation, it is the battlefield. Words have become weapons, not to illuminate but to obscure. Meaning shifts like sand beneath the weight of interpretation. What was once solid is now fluid, molded to fit the desires of those who wield power. The war of narratives has replaced the search for truth, and in this war, victory does not belong to those who are right, but to those who control perception. The result is not order, but perpetual struggle, not between classes or races, or even ideologies, but between realities themselves. There is no longer a shared world, only competing fictions, each demanding allegiance, each insisting it is the one true faith. The theocratic democracy, a system that sustains itself on conflict. In this new order, democracy no longer serves the people, it serves the conflict that sustains it. The more unstable the world becomes, the stronger its rulers grow. Theocratic values have been woven into the mechanisms of governance, but not as a means of salvation. Religion is not a refuge, but a weaponized theology, a faith shaped not by divine revelation but by political necessity. The state does not seek truth, it manufactures it. The sacred texts are rewritten not by prophets but by committee. And yet the people believe. They believe because belief is demanded, because faith, no matter how hollow, is still preferable to the terror of uncertainty. To navigate a world where reality bends under the weight of conflicting narratives, the people cling to whatever faith is offered, whether the dogma of the state, the doctrine of the revolution, or the gospel of the market. The death of contemplation, how thought became the enemy. To contemplate is to slow down. To reflect is to resist the tide of imposed meaning. But in a world driven by perpetual conflict, there is no time to think. The dissolution of contemplation is not a side effect, it is the system's primary function. The citizens are kept in a state of perpetual hunger, not only for material wealth but for meaning, for validation, for identity. But this hunger is never satisfied, only redirected. When faith fails, they turn to ideology. When ideology disappoints, they turn to consumption. When consumption leaves them empty, they return to faith. The cycle continues, and in its motion, power is preserved. To think is to see the strings. To pause is to recognize the illusion. And so, the people are kept moving, desperate, searching, consuming, never stopping long enough to realize that they are not in control. This is the shattered logos, a world where truth is whatever must be believed in the moment, where faith and politics devour each other, where democracy functions not as governance, but as a machine that feeds on instability. It is a system designed to sustain itself by ensuring that no one ever knows what is real. The war of narratives. Truth is not discovered, it is assigned. The war is not fought with bullets or bombs, it is fought with words. Once wars were waged for territory, for resources, for conquest. Now war is waged over who controls the story. In this new battlefield, the weapons are not swords but slogans. The soldiers are not warriors but narrators. The goal is not to defeat an enemy but to rewrite reality itself. In the war of narratives, victory does not belong to those who are right, or even those who are persuasive. Victory belongs to those who dictate the framework of the conversation, who decide what can and cannot be questioned. The most powerful forces in society are not the ones that impose belief by force, but those that make belief inescapable. There are no longer objective facts. There are only interpretations, each vying for dominance. The concept of truth, once fixed and sacred, has been shattered into 1,000 conflicting versions, each more real than the last, depending on who tells the story. The 3 laws of narrative war. 1. The power to name is the power to rule. In a society ruled by narrative, those who define the language define the battle. Labels are not descriptions but weapons, used to elevate, to condemn, to erase. When a person or idea can be named, categorized, and assigned a meaning, they no longer belong to themselves. They belong to the ones who named them. A man is no longer a man, he is a construct of the system. A movement is no longer a movement, it is a symptom of oppression. A crime is no longer a crime, it is an act of resistance, or an act of treason, depending on who tells the story. Truth is not something that exists independently. It is assigned. 2. Contradiction is strength. The war of narratives does not require coherence, it requires motion. The more narratives contradict one another, the more energy is expended in the struggle, and the harder it becomes to escape the battlefield. Yesterday's hero is today's villain. Yesterday's justice is today's oppression. What was true this morning is false by nightfall. Cognitive dissonance is not a flaw, it is the fuel of the system. When belief is forced to shift from one extreme to another, when the foundations of reality are rewritten overnight, the people are trapped in a state of constant reaction, never reflection. The moment they begin to question, the world shifts beneath them again. And so the struggle never ends. 3. Memory is the enemy. In the war of narratives, history is not a record of the past. It is a weapon for the present. The past does not belong to those who lived it, but to those who control its retelling. Facts are rewritten, events reinterpreted, figures erased. A new generation is taught a new truth, one that serves the needs of the moment. The lessons of yesterday are stripped of their meaning, replaced with whatever must be believed today. The hero of last year is the tyrant of this year. The slogan that once defined a movement is now taboo. The revolution devours its children, then pretends they never existed. The people no longer trust their own memory. They look to the state, to the media, to the preachers of the new faith, and they ask, what is true today? The answer is always different. In a society built on shifting narratives, democracy is no longer a system of governance. It is a ritual, a sacred performance in the theater of control. Like the theocracies of old, it offers the illusion of participation, but only within the boundaries set by its priests. In the past, the clergy controlled truth through scripture. Now truth is controlled through media, technology, and ideology, each reinforcing the other in a cycle of manufactured faith. The new theocracy is not bound by a single doctrine. It is fluid, adapting as needed, shifting between moral absolutism and radical relativism with ease. When obedience is needed, morality is absolute. When corruption must be justified, morality is subjective. This duality is not a flaw. It is the system's greatest strength. The result is a population caught between extremes. Those who still believe in the old narratives, who cling to tradition, faith, or reason, are branded as heretics, relics of a world that no longer exists. Those who embrace the new narratives, who accept the ever-changing truth, become its enforcers, policing others, ensuring that no deviation goes unpunished. And in the middle are the masses, confused, exhausted, and compliant, too afraid to question, too hungry to resist. The engine of perpetual struggle. In the war of narratives, there is no peace. Peace is stagnation, and stagnation is death. The system does not seek harmony, it seeks motion, conflict without end. Every idea must be opposed, every identity must be challenged, every tradition must be overturned, only to be replaced by new ones that will themselves be torn down tomorrow. The people are never allowed to settle, never allowed to rest. They must always be fighting. This is not an accident, it is the design. By ensuring that no one ever truly wins, power remains in the hands of those who moderate the battle, who decide which side is righteous and which side must be cast out. The war continues, not because it must, but because those who wage it need it to exist. To rule a world of struggle, one does not need to conquer, one only needs to control the story. First, the corruption of language. When words no longer describe reality but create it. Language was once a bridge between thought and reality. To name something was to understand it, to define its nature, to fix it in place so that it could be known. Civilization was built on this foundation. Laws, contracts, faith, philosophy, all depended on the sacred assumption that words had meaning. Now that assumption is gone. Language is no longer a tool of description, it is a tool of manipulation. It does not serve truth, it serves power. The meaning of a word is not what it was yesterday, nor what it will be tomorrow. Its function is not to define but to shape perception, to bend the mind toward a desired reality. When language is corrupted, thought follows. When thought is corrupted, reality itself fractures. The weaponization of meaning. The first step in controlling a society is not seizing its wealth or its land. It is seizing its words. In the new order, language is not an organic expression of human experience. It is a battlefield, where words are not debated, but dictated. Definitions are rewritten. What once meant one thing now means another. Speech is policed. Certain words become sacred, untouchable. Others become forbidden, erased. Intent is irrelevant. It does not matter what one means, it matters how it can be interpreted. By shifting the definitions of words, the structure of thought itself is rewired. Ideas that were once clear become muddled. Debates that could once be settled become infinite loops of argument, where no conclusion is ever reached, because the meanings of the words themselves are never fixed. This is not censorship in the traditional sense. It is something more insidious. Instead of silencing speech, the system hollows it out from within, making words unreliable, stripping them of their ability to express anything real. When words can mean anything, they mean nothing. The two functions of corrupt language. Corrupt language serves two purposes. 1. To control perception. By redefining words, power can shape how people see the world without ever changing the material conditions of reality. Freedom can be redefined as obedience. Justice can be redefined as vengeance. Democracy can be redefined as submission. 2. The people do not rebel against oppression if they no longer have a word to describe it. They do not resist tyranny if tyranny is rebranded as liberation. Reality is not changed. Only the words are. But in a world where perception is everything, this is enough. 3. To paralyze thought. The second function of corrupt language is to ensure that no resistance can be effectively organized. If no one can agree on what oppression means, how can they oppose it? If no one can define what justice is, how can they demand it? If every word can mean both its opposite and itself, what is left to argue for? 4. The result is intellectual paralysis. People do not stop thinking because they are silenced. They stop thinking because thought itself becomes impossible. In this way, the war is won before it begins. There is no need for force. There is no need for censorship. The people are free to speak, but only in a language that ensures they can never challenge those in power. The state is the priesthood of meaning. In the past, language was sacred because it was rooted in something beyond human control. It was given by gods, by nature, by reason, something higher than the whims of men. This placed limits on power, for no ruler could declare that 2 + 2 = 5 without violating the very fabric of reality. But now reality is malleable. The state has become the priesthood of language, dictating what can and cannot be said, altering meaning at will. It is not enough to obey, one must believe, and belief is no longer a function of reason but of repetition. If a lie is spoken often enough, if words are redefined loudly enough, if contradictions are imposed forcefully enough, the mind surrenders. The people are not simply told what to think, they are trained to speak in ways that make other thoughts impossible. If dissent is framed as hate, it cannot be debated. If questioning authority is framed as violence, it cannot be permitted. If truth is framed as relative, it can be changed as needed. Language is no longer descriptive. It is prescriptive. It does not reflect reality. It creates it. The ritual of empty speech. To survive in a world of corrupt language, one must participate in the ritual of empty speech. This is a world where words are spoken not to communicate but to conform. The value of a statement is not in its truth but in its function. To signal loyalty. To establish purity. To display submission. The more meaningless the phrase, the more powerful it becomes, because it demands not understanding but faith. In this world, those who refuse to engage in the ritual are not seen as neutral, they are seen as threats. To remain silent is to rebel. To ask for clarity is to blaspheme. The highest virtue is to speak the expected words, even if they contradict the words spoken yesterday. Because contradiction is not a flaw, it is the proof of faith. The final stage, the death of thought. When language is corrupted, when meaning is fluid, when words become instruments of control rather than tools of truth, thought itself begins to decay. The people no longer know what is real. They no longer trust their own memories, their own reasoning, their own senses. They turn instead to the system, waiting to be told what to say, what to believe, what is true today. And when that truth changes tomorrow, they will accept it, not because they are forced to, but because they have lost the ability to do otherwise. This is the final victory of power, not the suppression of speech, but the destruction of meaning itself. For when meaning is lost, there is nothing left to fight for. First, the theocratic democracy, faith in the state, worship of the market, and the sacrament of consumption. Democracy was once thought to be the final form of human governance, a system so inherently self-correcting that it would resist both tyranny and decay. It was meant to be a mechanism of reason, where individuals could freely debate, elect their leaders, and participate in shaping the future. But democracy no longer functions as a government of the people. It has become a faith. It is no longer a means of governance but a sacred order, upheld not by reason but by doctrine. And like all theocracies before it, it demands obedience, ritual, and sacrifice. Yet unlike the theocracies of old, which worshipped gods beyond human power, this new faith is bound to the state itself, intertwined with the forces of ideology and economics, forming an unholy trinity. 1. The state is God, the infallible authority, shaping reality itself. 2. The market as the church, the holy institution where salvation is sought in endless consumption. 3. The citizen as the believer, the devout participant, seeking meaning in an existence defined by contradiction. Together, these forces sustain the illusion of choice while ensuring that no alternative can exist outside of their control. The state is God, infallibility through chaos. In the past, the divine right of kings was justified through Scripture. The rulers of the world claimed to be chosen by higher powers, and thus their authority could not be questioned. To rebel against them was to rebel against God. Today, democracy functions the same way. To question the system itself is heresy. The state is no longer simply an institution, it is the moral center of reality, the sole source of legitimate authority. And yet, unlike the theocracies of old, this system does not claim perfection. It thrives on its own dysfunction. The illusion of democracy is not that it works, but that it is the only thing that ever can. The people are told, yes, the system is corrupt, but all systems are corrupt. Yes, the elections are manipulated, but they are still better than any alternative. Yes, democracy is flawed, but to question it is to invite chaos. Thus, corruption becomes a feature, not a flaw. It is the proof that the system is real. Only false religions claim perfection. True faith is in a broken God, in a system that never works but must always be worshipped. And so, the people pray at the altar of the state, not because they trust it, but because they fear what lies beyond it. The market as the church, the only redemption is consumption. The second pillar of the theocratic democracy is the market, not as an economic system, but as a religious structure. If the state is God, the market is the church, the intermediary between the people and salvation. Consumerism replaces contemplation. In a world without meaning, the only escape is distraction. Debt replaces sin. To be in debt is to be morally burdened, to owe a tithe not to God but to the system itself. Wealth replaces virtue. Success is not measured in wisdom, but in accumulation, not of knowledge, but of products, of entertainment, of fleeting pleasure. But no matter how much the people consume, the hunger remains. The market does not sell fulfillment. It sells the illusion of fulfillment. Thus, the church of the market keeps its congregation eternally unsatisfied. The promise of salvation is always just one more purchase away, one more election cycle away, one more ideological purge away. And so the people are kept in motion, not moving forward, but running in circles, chasing redemption in products, in trends, in temporary highs that keep them too distracted to question the structure itself. The citizen as the believer, the devotion of the faithful. Every theocracy requires a devoted congregation, and in the theocratic democracy, the citizens themselves become the enforcers of doctrine. They are not merely subjects of the system, they are its priests and its executioners. They monitor each other's speech, ensuring that no heresy is uttered. They offer public confessions, renouncing past wrongthink in desperate bids for forgiveness. They hunt the unfaithful, ensuring that those who reject the system are cast out, unpersoned, erased. And just as in religious extremism, purity is never enough. The faithful must always prove their devotion by attacking those who are less devout. The result is an endless spiral of purification, where yesterday's revolutionaries are tomorrow's heretics, where those who once enforced the system are eventually consumed by it. This is not oppression from above but from within. The system no longer needs enforcers when the people police themselves. The sacrament of struggle, perpetual crisis as a means of control. A democracy built on faith cannot allow peace. Peace leads to contemplation, and contemplation leads to doubt. Thus, the theocratic democracy sustains itself through perpetual crisis. There is always an enemy, whether external or internal. There is always a disaster, whether economic, social, or ideological. There is always an election that will decide everything, though nothing ever truly changes. The people are kept in a state of constant war, not against a foreign power but against themselves. Every crisis demands action, every action demands loyalty, and every moment of doubt is met with a new reason to believe. The chaos is not a failure of the system, it is the system. The choice that isn't one, extreme capitalism or total collapse. As the theocratic democracy continues to consume itself, it leaves the people with a false choice. 1. Embrace extreme capitalism, where every aspect of life is commodified, where human worth is measured in productivity and profit, where democracy dissolves into corporate feudalism. 2. Collapse entirely, surrendering to chaos, letting the hunger of the people devour what remains. Neither option is desirable, but that is the genius of the system. It ensures that no alternative exists. Those who resist extreme capitalism are cast as radicals, as enemies of progress. Those who reject the market's rule are labeled as threats, as terrorists, as obstacles to the common good. And so, the people do not fight back. They adapt. They become parasites on their own undoing, consuming until there is nothing left, the inevitable end, when the faith is no longer believed. All theocracies eventually face their reckoning. There comes a moment when the faith no longer holds, when the people stop believing, when the rituals lose their power. But the theocratic democracy has prepared for this. When faith begins to wane, when the hunger grows unbearable, when the people start to realize that no savior is coming, the system has one final trick. It shifts the blame. The failure is not the fault of democracy, it is the fault of those who did not believe hard enough. The suffering is not the fault of the market, it is the fault of those who did not consume correctly. The collapse is not the fault of the system, it is the fault of those who dare to question it. And so, the cycle begins again. The people turn on each other, hunting heretics, seeking scapegoats, tearing down what remains, not realizing until it is too late that they were the sacrifice all along. This is the endgame of the theocratic democracy, a system that does not rule through control but through faith in a lie so deeply embedded that even as the world burns, the people will still believe it is the only path forward. Second, the theology of the masses. When faith is manufactured and belief becomes a weapon, there was a time when theology was the realm of mystics and scholars, of prophets and priests. It was an exploration of the divine, an attempt to grasp what lay beyond human perception, to touch something higher than the self. Now, theology belongs to the masses, not because they have sought it, but because it has been given to them, prepackaged, repurposed, and redefined. The new theology is not a search for truth, nor a discipline of reflection. It is a tool of control, engineered to shape behavior, direct action, and enforce obedience. The masses do not find their faith is assigned to them. This is not religion in the traditional sense. It is something more insidious, something more totalizing. It is a theology without a God, where doctrine is dictated not by divine revelation but by social consensus, where scripture is rewritten in real time, and where heresy is punished not by an eternal hell, but by immediate exile from the collective. Faith no longer belongs to the soul, it belongs to the system, the religion of ideology. All societies require belief. Without it, there is no cohesion, no purpose, no sense of direction. The rulers of the past understood this, binding their authority to divine right, ensuring that their laws were seen as extensions of something higher than themselves. But the modern world has no divine right. The old gods are dead, and in their place, new deities have been forged. Deities of social justice and economic salvation, of endless revolution and perpetual progress, of equality enforced by hierarchy and liberty achieved through restriction. This new religion does not ask for contemplation, it demands action. It does not invite belief, it enforces it. It has its own saints and martyrs, its own sacraments and rituals, its own unforgivable sins. The original sin is privilege, the mark of inherent corruption that can never be fully erased. The redemption is activism, the endless work of purification that never truly cleanses. The sacrament is consumption, the act of proving one's faith by buying, sharing, signaling devotion. The heresy is doubt, the act of questioning what must be believed, of resisting the demands of the new faith. And just like the theocracies of old, this system never offers salvation, only the promise that salvation exists, just beyond reach. The people are kept in a state of endless atonement, forever trying to correct sins they did not commit, chasing righteousness that can never be achieved. The breeding of demons. But a system built on faith alone is not enough. It must also have an enemy. In the old religions, demons were external forces, agents of chaos, malevolent spirits, manifestations of corruption that sought to tempt and destroy. But in the theology of the masses, the demons are internal. They are the people themselves. Through ideology, through propaganda, through the slow erosion of reason, the masses are taught that they are inherently broken, inherently sinful, inherently corrupt, not by their actions but by their very existence. And so the system does not need to create oppression, it only needs to convince the people that oppression is inevitable. It does not need to impose suffering, it only needs to make suffering the proof of righteousness. The citizens become their own tormentors, demanding punishment, seeking judgment, turning on one another in desperate attempts to cleanse themselves. A world like this does not need executioners. It does not need prisons, it only needs believers, the hunger of the people. When a society is starved of truth, it will consume anything to fill the void. The masses are not given meaning, they are given hunger, a deep insatiable need for purpose, identity, belonging. But no matter how much they consume, the hunger never ends. They consume ideologies but find them hollow, they consume outrage but it never satisfies, they consume products but still feel empty. And so, they consume each other. The hunger is the engine of the system. It drives the economy, fuels the movements, justifies the surveillance, sustains the conflict. A population that is fed will rest. A population that is starving will obey. This is the theology of the masses, a faith that enslaves rather than liberates, a doctrine that demands hunger rather than fulfillment, a system that does not ask what is true, but only what must be believed today. It is not a religion of peace but of perpetual struggle, where belief is not a personal conviction, but a public performance, where the soul is not saved but exploited, and where the people are not lifted into the divine, but dragged into an abyss of their own making. Second, neo-Marxism in the pulpit. The gospel of the collective, the new church of power. Marxism was once a theory of economic struggle, a materialist doctrine that sought to dismantle class hierarchies and redistribute power. It rejected mysticism, saw religion as an opiate of the masses, and sought to replace faith with reason, scripture with dialectics, and God with the inevitability of historical progress. Yet, like all dead gods, Marxism did not disappear. It was reborn, not in the factories and workers' movements of the past, but in the pulpits of a new ideological faith. It no longer spoke only of class struggle but of a far more expansive battle, one that encompassed race, gender, identity, and even morality itself. Neo-Marxism became a theology, and the revolution it preaches is no longer against kings or capitalists but against reality itself. The church of the collective. The new faith does not appeal to logic, nor does it seek converts through debate. Like all religions, it spreads through emotion, ritual, and the promise of salvation. It offers a moral framework. Instead of good and evil, there is the oppressed and the oppressor. It provides a creation myth. The world is not a product of history, effort, or civilization. It is a system built entirely on exploitation, designed from the beginning to oppress. It demands ritual confession. The faithful must acknowledge their privilege, repent for their inherited sins, and perform acts of self-punishment to prove their righteousness. It enforces a strict moral code. There are sacred words that must be spoken and blasphemous ideas that must never be entertained. And, like all faiths before it, it does not tolerate heresy. The priests and the heretics. The greatest trick of the new theocracy is that its priests do not call themselves priests. They claim to be scholars, journalists, activists, or educators. Yet their function is unmistakably religious. They dictate doctrine, excommunicate the impure, and demand total obedience. They do not debate. They decree. They do not persuade, they prosecute. They do not seek truth, they manufacture it. To question them is not merely to be wrong, it is to be evil. And so the new church grows, not by converting through argument, but by controlling the very language in which arguments are made. It ensures that its ideology is inescapable, woven into schools, corporations, entertainment, and law. Where old theocracies burned books, the new theocracy rewrites them. Where old theocracies punished heresy with exile, the new theocracy ensures that heretics become invisible, erased from public life, stripped of their voice, branded as beyond redemption. The myth of progress, the promise of revolution. The neo-Marxist gospel preaches that history is a perpetual revolution, that utopia is always just beyond reach, and that the only way forward is through constant destruction. There can be no stability, no completion, no satisfaction, because a satisfied population is a population that no longer needs the faith. If economic injustice is corrected, the movement shifts to cultural struggle. If cultural struggle finds no enemy, the movement turns inward, devouring its own. If a victory is declared, a new enemy must be invented. Revolutions of the past sought to build something new. The new revolution seeks only to tear down, feeding on itself, ensuring that no ideology, no leader, no system can ever be pure enough to survive. The final lesson of the new faith is this: the revolution does not end when power is seized. The revolution ends when there is nothing left to destroy. And by then it is too late to realize the only thing left was the people themselves. Second, breeding demons. When ideology becomes possession, and the masses become the monsters they fear, evil is no longer something external. It is no longer a force that lurks in the dark, whispering temptations to the weak. In the theology of the masses, evil is birthed from within. The demons of this world are not supernatural, they are manufactured through ideology, through propaganda, through the slow corrosion of the soul. The system does not need to create external enemies, it turns its own people into them. Through manipulation, through the corruption of language, through the relentless reshaping of perception, citizens become possessed not by spirits but by ideas that strip them of reason, of conscience, of autonomy. They become agents of the machine, carriers of an infection that spreads from mind to mind, from generation to generation, until humanity itself is rewritten. This is not merely control, this is possession on a mass scale, and the possessed do not know they are lost. The ritual of dehumanization. All oppressive systems begin with a lie, that the enemy is not merely wrong but inhuman. The old religion spoke of demons as beings that infiltrated the mind, twisting thoughts, feeding on fear. The new theology accomplishes the same goal but through ideology rather than mysticism. The system does not burn witches, it creates them. It does not fear monsters, it breeds them. It does not fight evil. It defines it, ensuring that it always exists, ensuring that there is always someone to blame, someone to purge. By designating entire groups as irredeemable, as tainted, as dangerous, the system justifies any atrocity committed against them. The masses, convinced of their righteousness, become the very monsters they claim to oppose, hunting, silencing, and destroying without remorse. They do not see themselves as oppressors. They see themselves as priests, as soldiers of justice, as exorcists purging evil from the world. And so, they become the demons they were taught to fear. The possession of the mind. In this system, possession is not metaphorical, it is not mystical, it is a psychological reality, a process by which an individual loses their capacity for independent thought, their ability to question, their very sense of self. It begins with language. The mind is reprogrammed through repetition, through indoctrination, through the constant reinforcement of acceptable and unacceptable thoughts. The first step is doubt, a questioning of one's own instincts, a slow erosion of personal confidence. The second step is guilt, the realization that one has always been sinful, complicit, broken. The third step is submission, the surrender of independent judgment in favor of the collective's moral authority. The final step is zealotry, not merely compliance, but active participation in the persecution of those who have not yet been possessed. By the time possession is complete, the individual is no longer a person in the traditional sense. They are an extension of the doctrine, a vessel for the ideology, a machine running a program written by others. They no longer think, they only believe, hunger without satisfaction. But the system does not create peace. It does not offer an end to struggle. It creates an endless hunger. The possessed do not feel fulfilled. They feel empty. The more they destroy, the more they demand. The more they enforce, the more restless they become. They believe they are fighting for justice, yet the world does not improve, so they must search for new enemies, new heresies, new reasons to hate. The result is an accelerating cycle of destruction. Yesterday's radicals become today's heretics. Yesterday's revolutionaries become today's oppressors. Yesterday's doctrines become tomorrow's blasphemy. The possessed turn on each other, consuming their own ranks, tearing down their own idols, ensuring that the fire never dies, that the hunger is never satisfied, that the machine is always fed. The endgame, when the masses become the abyss. Nietzsche warned that those who fight monsters must take care not to become them. But this system ensures that becoming the monster is the only way to survive. Those who resist possession are hunted. Those who refuse to speak the sacred words are erased. Those who dare to think, to question, to doubt, they are the true demons in the eyes of the possessed. And so, the transformation is complete. The masses are no longer human in the way they once were. They have been stripped of their individuality, their compassion, their reason. They have been taught to love their chains, to celebrate their servitude, to destroy without regret, to burn down the world in the name of progress, to feed the machine with their own souls. They do not see that they are lost. They only see that there is more work to do, more demons to hunt, more minds to cleanse, more enemies to destroy. And so, the system survives, not by ruling over monsters, but by ensuring that the people themselves become the very things they once feared. Second, the hunger of the people. A society that consumes itself, one soul at a time. There was a time when hunger was simple. It was a need for food, for shelter, for survival. It was the raw instinct that drove humanity forward, that pushed people to build, to create, to sustain. Now hunger is something deeper. It is not physical but existential. It is not a lack of resources but a lack of meaning. The people are not starving for food, they are starving for purpose, for identity, for something to believe in that will fill the void left by the collapse of everything that once gave life structure. But the hunger can never be satisfied. The system is not designed to nourish but to keep the people in a perpetual state of desperation, consuming endlessly yet never feeling full. Whether through ideology, consumption, or conflict, the hunger is the force that drives the machine, ensuring that the masses remain restless, unsatisfied, and easily controlled. This is not an accident. It is the system's greatest achievement, the consumption of faith. All civilizations begin with belief. Whether in gods, in laws, in natural order, society requires an anchor, a shared understanding of what is real, what is right, what is worth striving for. But in the theocratic democracy, faith is not given to the people. It is sold to them. The people do not worship gods, they worship trends. The people do not seek truth, they seek validation. The people do not find purpose, they consume it, moment by moment, in an endless cycle of ideological fads, corporate slogans, and disposable identities. Nothing is permanent. Every belief has an expiration date. The movements of yesterday are the embarrassments of today. The truths of one generation are the sins of the next. The idols of today will be sacrificed tomorrow, and the people will cheer as they fall, never realizing that they too will be cast aside when their usefulness has expired. Faith has become a product, manufactured and discarded at will, and yet the people still hunger. The consumption of identity. The people no longer know who they are. Where identity was once shaped by family, by community, by tradition, now it is dictated by corporations, algorithms, and ideological institutions. People do not discover who they are told who they are, and if they resist, they are cast out. But identity is never stable. It must always evolve, always fracture, always reinvent itself to keep the system running. A stable identity is a dangerous one. It gives people a foundation from which to question authority. But a fluid identity, one that shifts and breaks apart over time, ensures that people remain vulnerable, desperate, and endlessly searching for something that will make them feel whole. And so the system creates a society where identity is no longer inherited or earned, but declared and revoked at will. People are encouraged to define themselves not by what they create but by what they consume. Every movement, every cause, every ideology becomes another layer of identity to wear, until it too is discarded for the next thing. The people believe they are free, but they are merely feeding their own dissolution, devouring themselves one belief at a time. The consumption of conflict. Hunger is not passive. It is not merely an emptiness, it is a force that demands to be fed. And when food is no longer enough, when belief is no longer enough, when identity is no longer enough, the people turn to the only thing left, each other. The system ensures that there is always a crisis, always a war, always an enemy to hate, whether real or manufactured. If no external enemy exists, one is created. If no internal division exists, one is manufactured. If peace threatens to take hold, a new outrage is introduced to keep the people engaged in the struggle. And the people obey, not because they are forced to, but because they are starving for something to fight for. They consume conflict as readily as they consume products. They rage, they protest, they scream, they cancel, they burn, they attack, believing that if they just destroy the right enemy, if they just punish the right heretic, if they just purge the right impurity, they will finally feel full. But they never do. The hunger only deepens. The devouring class. In this system there are no victors, only the devouring class. These are not elites, not oligarchs, not kings or emperors. The devouring class is made up of the very people it feeds upon, the restless masses who seek fulfillment but only find themselves consuming their own world, their own institutions, their own history, and finally, each other. They do not realize that they are eating themselves alive. They only know that the hunger remains. And so the cycle continues. The revolution never ends, because there is always more to burn. The outrage never subsides, because there is always a new blasphemy to condemn. The people never rest, because resting means facing the terrible truth, that the hunger can never be satisfied because it was never meant to be. This is the ultimate victory of the system. To create a world where people consume not just products, not just beliefs, not just identities, but each other, endlessly, without ever realizing that they are the very fuel that keeps the machine running. They believe they are fighting for justice. They believe they are making progress. They believe that if they just consume enough, fight enough, believe enough, they will finally be whole. But they never will be, because the hunger is the system itself, and it will never, ever let them go. Third, the parasites of civilization. When a society feeds on itself and calls it progress. Civilization was meant to be a structure, a foundation upon which humanity could build something greater than itself. It was the promise that effort would lead to stability, that knowledge would lead to enlightenment, that progress would bring prosperity. But civilization has turned against itself. What was once a system for growth has become a system for consumption. The institutions that once nurtured society now feed upon it. The people who once built the future now devour the present. There is no longer a force driving civilization forward, there is only a force draining it from within. Like a host infected with parasites, society is being hollowed out by those who do not create, but only extract. Every structure, every tradition, every system that once provided stability, is now nothing more than a resource to be consumed, until there is nothing left but ruin. The three parasites of the modern world. Civilization is dying not from war, not from famine, not from disaster, but from a sickness within. Three great parasites now feast upon the body of the world. 1. The economic parasite, where wealth no longer comes from creation, but from manipulation, where profit is made not by building, but by extracting, speculating, and ensuring that nothing has value except as a transaction. 2. The social parasite, where relationships, culture, and human connection are commodified, turned into currency, consumed as entertainment, where people are not individuals but brands, and every aspect of life is a performance for an audience that never stops watching. 3. The political parasite, where governance is not about leadership but about perpetuating crisis, ensuring that the people are never stable enough, never secure enough, never content enough to demand anything real. Where policy is a product, manufactured to sustain power rather than serve the people. Each of these parasites feeds on the same host, the people themselves. And the people, starving for meaning, desperate for belonging, do not resist. They become parasites too. A society of consumption without purpose. Once humanity consumed to survive. Now it survives to consume. It is no longer enough to work, to build, to innovate. Every aspect of life must be exploited. Every system must be bled dry. Every idea must be stripped of its original meaning and repackaged as a product. Education is not for knowledge, it is for credentials. Art is not for beauty, it is for profit. Politics is not for governance, it is for spectacle. Even the most sacred aspects of human existence, love, faith, identity, family, have been turned into commodities, things to be bought and sold, things to be consumed and discarded when they no longer serve their temporary function. The result is a civilization that eats itself. It consumes its own past, rewriting history to suit the present. It consumes its own people, reducing them to workers, products, and disposable assets. It consumes its own future, ensuring that there is nothing left for the generations that follow, the devouring class and the hollowed masses. At the top of this system sits the devouring class, those who do not build, but only extract. They are the financiers who gamble with entire economies, the corporations that engineer artificial need, the politicians who manufacture crises for their own gain. But beneath them is an even greater horror, the hollowed masses. These are the people who have been stripped of their ability to create, to dream, to believe in anything greater than themselves. They no longer build, innovate, or contribute, they simply consume, endlessly, desperately, until there is nothing left. This is not a society of citizens. It is a society of parasites, each feeding on the one below it, each taking more than it gives, each demanding more even as it collapses under its own weight. And in the end, when the system finally crumbles, when there is nothing left to devour, when the last resource has been spent and the last structure has fallen, the parasites will turn on the only thing left, themselves. Third, the economy of the soul, when existence becomes a transaction, and the self is a commodity. There was a time when the soul was sacred. Whether understood through religion, philosophy, or art, the soul was seen as the essence of being, something beyond material value, beyond trade, beyond the cold logic of the market. But in the parasite economy, nothing is sacred. Even the soul, the very foundation of identity, belief, and purpose, has been commodified, packaged, and sold. It is no longer a mystery, no longer something to be cultivated or explored. It is now currency, something to be spent, traded, exploited, and, when necessary, devalued into nothing. In this world, existence itself has become a transaction, the transformation of the soul into currency. The modern world does not require chains to enslave people. Debt is the new shackle. Once people work to live, now they live to pay. From the moment they are born, they are assigned a value. Not by their actions, not by their thoughts, not by their contributions, but by what they owe. Their education is a financial contract. Their labor is a commodity that belongs to the market. Their time is not their own. It is leased out in exchange for survival. But even beyond economics, the soul itself has become a financial instrument. People are no longer valued for who they are, but for what they can provide, for how efficiently they can be extracted. And so, identity, belief, and purpose are no longer spiritual pursuits, they are investments. Attention is currency. The more you are seen, the more you are worth. Outrage is profit. The more controversy you generate, the more value you hold. Authenticity is an illusion. It is not something you possess, but something you manufacture to be sold. The system does not need people to be free. It needs them to be valuable assets, producing, consuming, and above all, believing that their worth is tied to their economic function. The cost of belonging, debt as a moral system. Debt is no longer merely financial, it is moral, ideological, and existential. Every person is born into an inherited burden, not just of money, but of guilt, obligation, and historical sins. They owe society for their privilege or lack thereof. They owe the economy their productivity, their time, their exhaustion. They owe the past their allegiance, whether to correct its wrongs or to sustain its narratives. And so they live in perpetual repayment, never fully owning their own existence, always in deficit, always needing to give more. This is not accidental. A person who is debt-free, financially, mentally, or spiritually, is a person who is dangerous to the system. They cannot be controlled. They cannot be manipulated by fear. So the system ensures that no one is ever free of their obligations. To exist is to be in debt, selling the self-identity as a market product. In the past, identity was something discovered. It was forged through experience, through struggle, through the choices one made. Now, identity is assigned, dictated by external forces, marketed like a product and sold to the highest bidder. People no longer define themselves by their actions or beliefs. They define themselves by their affiliations, their labels, their branding. They do not express themselves, they perform themselves. They do not cultivate wisdom, they accumulate social currency. They do not seek meaning, they market an identity that others will find valuable. And so the economy of the soul does not simply demand labor and obedience. It demands that every aspect of a person's life become part of the marketplace. Their emotions are monetized, their suffering is content, their thoughts are tracked, analyzed, and sold. Nothing is private, nothing is sacred, nothing belongs to the individual anymore. The devaluation of the soul. But what happens when everything is commodified? What happens when even the soul is treated as a disposable asset? It loses its value. When people become products, they become replaceable. They become interchangeable components in a machine that does not care for their existence beyond what they can provide. And when they can no longer provide, they are discarded, replaced, forgotten. Their beliefs are recycled, their movements co-opted, their struggles turned into corporate slogans. Their suffering is repackaged into marketable activism, their outrage into clickable content. And the worst part? They embrace it. The system has convinced them that this is freedom, to endlessly sell themselves, to live as brands, to measure their worth in numbers, in followers, in engagement metrics. They do not realize they have been stripped of everything real. They only know that if they stop producing, they will cease to exist. The final transaction, selling one's own destruction. In the final stage of the economy of the soul, people do not simply sell their labor, their thoughts, their identity. They sell their own undoing. They become agents of the system that enslaves them. They defend the institutions that exploit them. They mock those who question, attacking the very people trying to wake them from their stupor. And when the system no longer needs them, they disappear, having exhausted their usefulness, having spent their last resource themselves. This is the great success of the parasitic world. It does not take from people. It convinces them to give themselves away. And when they are left with nothing, no identity, no meaning, no soul, they are told the answer is simple. Consume more, work more, believe more, give more, but never ask what is left, because if they ask, they will see the truth. Nothing is left. The economy of the soul has devoured everything. And still the hunger remains. Third, capitalism is the new God. Worship through consumption, salvation through the market. God is dead, but he has been replaced. Once faith was directed toward something higher, toward morality, toward purpose, toward a truth beyond human control. Civilization anchored itself in the sacred, in the belief that life had meaning beyond the immediate, beyond the material. But in the new order, God has been reborn as the market. Capitalism is no longer just an economic system. It is a theology, a faith structure that shapes how people see the world, how they understand themselves, and how they define morality. It has its own rituals, its own commandments, its own priests and prophets. Where once people prayed for salvation, they now shop for it. Where once they sought enlightenment, they now seek profit. Where once they bowed before the divine, they now kneel before brands, corporations, and endless consumption. This is the new religion of the world, one that does not demand devotion to a god, but to a system that promises fulfillment while ensuring that it never arrives. The gospel of endless growth. The old religion spoke of eternal life, of a future beyond suffering, of a reward that justified sacrifice. Capitalism offers its own version of this promise, not in the afterlife, but through infinite economic expansion, through endless production, through eternal consumption. Growth is sacred. A business that does not grow is a failure. A nation that does not expand its wealth is in decline. More is always better. To have enough is never enough. There must always be more profits, more markets, more resources to exploit. Debt is a virtue. To be indebted is to be part of the system. It ensures loyalty. It keeps the faithful in line. In this world, stagnation is sin. To be content is to be regressive. To step outside the system is to invite ruin. There is no final destination. There is only the pursuit, the ceaseless chase for more, until the world itself is stripped bare. The priests of profit. Every faith has its clergy, those who define doctrine, who interpret the sacred texts, who act as intermediaries between the divine and the masses. The new faith is no different. The CEOs and financiers are the high priests, the ones who shape reality, who decide what is worthy of investment, what industries rise and fall. The politicians and policymakers are the bishops, ensuring that the rules always serve the market, that the people remain faithful, that no heresy, no alternative economic model can take root. The media, advertisers, and influencers are the preachers, spreading the gospel, making sure the people remain believers, keeping them entertained, engaged, and too distracted to ever question the structure they serve. And the people? They are the congregation. They offer their labor as a tithe to the system, hoping that one day they too will rise into its ranks, that they will be rewarded for their faith. But they never will be. The market is not a God that grants salvation. It is a God that demands endless sacrifice, the sacrament of consumption. Every faith has rituals, practices that reinforce belief, that keep the worshippers engaged, that create a sense of meaning and belonging. In capitalism, consumption itself is the highest ritual. Shopping is an act of devotion. The products people buy are not just objects, they are symbols of identity, of status, of purpose. Advertising is scripture. It tells the faithful what they need, what they should desire, what will make them whole. Brand loyalty is religious loyalty. To wear the right logos, to support the right corporations, to consume the right products is to affirm one's place in the faith. Even rebellion against capitalism feeds capitalism. The system is so all-encompassing that even resistance becomes a product. Anti-corporate sentiment is sold in corporate-approved packaging. Revolutionary slogans are printed on T-shirts and sold for profit. Every critique of the system is absorbed, repackaged, and resold as just another lifestyle choice. There is no way out. The prosperity gospel, wealth as morality. In this faith, wealth is not just power, it is righteousness. The rich are not merely successful, they are virtuous. Their success is proof that they have done something right, that they have been chosen by the system, that they deserve what they have. And by contrast, the poor are not just unfortunate, they are sinners. If they struggle, it is because they did not work hard enough. If they suffer, it is because they did not believe enough in the system. If they fail, it is because they were weak, unworthy, undeserving. Poverty is not an economic failure, it is a moral failure, a sign of laziness, a lack of ambition, a lack of faith in the market's divine justice. And so, the masses do not question the system, instead they police each other. They judge the weak, they glorify the powerful, they compete for favor in a game that they will never be allowed to win. The apocalypse of capitalism, when there is nothing left to consume. All religions have an apocalypse, a vision of the end, a prophecy of destruction. Capitalism has one too. Because the market is not self-sustaining, it is self-consuming. It devours the planet, stripping it of resources, leaving behind ruin. It devours the economy, ensuring that wealth is concentrated at the top while the masses are left in perpetual struggle. It devours meaning itself, turning everything, love, art, knowledge, identity, into a product, leaving nothing real behind. There will come a moment when there is nothing left to consume. When the supply of resources, of workers, of distractions finally runs out. When the market, like every god before it, demands the ultimate sacrifice, the civilization that created it. And when that moment comes, there will be no salvation, there will be no redemption, there will only be ashes, because a system that only knows how to consume can never build. It can never create, it can only take, until it has taken everything. And still the faithful will pray, not for an end to the system, not for a new way forward, but for one last chance to buy, to sell, to consume, one last prayer to the God that has already devoured them whole. Third, the devouring class. Masters without vision, rulers without responsibility. A parasite does not see itself as a parasite. It sees itself as a force of necessity, a part of the natural order. It does not believe it destroys. It believes it simply takes what is needed, sustaining itself through the consumption of something larger than itself. So too does the devouring class, the rulers of the modern world, the architects of a system built not to nourish but to extract, to consume, to reduce all things into fuel for their own insatiable hunger. This class is not defined by nobility, by wisdom, by tradition. They are not kings, nor philosophers, nor guardians of civilization. They are not builders. They are feeders, the final stage of a system that no longer aspires to greatness but simply exists to sustain itself for one more cycle. They do not produce. They do not innovate. They do not lead. They devour, the architects of hunger. The devouring class does not need to rule through force. They rule through need. They control food, ensuring that hunger remains just enough to keep the masses desperate, but never enough to drive full rebellion. They control debt, ensuring that people remain indebted for life, never truly free, never able to think beyond survival. They control ideology, ensuring that society remains fractured, that the people fight among themselves instead of against the system itself. Their great skill is not governance but management of collapse. They do not seek to build an empire that lasts 1,000 years. They seek to extract everything of value before the collapse comes. They know that their system is unsustainable, that the resources are running dry, that the economy is built on illusions, that faith in their institutions is fading. And so their only priority is to take as much as possible before the fall. They do not innovate, they privatize. They do not expand, they consolidate. They do not govern, they extract. And when the system finally collapses, they will not be there to witness it. They will be gone, vanished into their fortresses, their private islands, their untouchable enclaves, having already drained every last drop of wealth, labor, and meaning from the world they have left behind. The corporate lords, the political priests, the untouchable few. The devouring class does not operate as a monolith. It has three primary factions, each feeding off a different aspect of society, each ensuring that civilization remains in a permanent state of decay, never collapsing entirely, but never recovering either. 1. The corporate lords, masters of the new feudalism. The old kings built kingdoms. The new rulers build monopolies. They do not conquer land, they conquer markets. They do not rule by bloodline, they rule by data, by influence, by algorithms that shape human behavior itself. They do not demand taxes, they demand subscription fees, intellectual property rights, perpetual payments for the right to exist within their system. They do not seek competition, they seek consolidation, to ensure that all roads, all services, all means of survival lead through them. The end result is not capitalism, it is corporate feudalism, where every individual is a tenant in a system they do not own, where they pay endlessly for access to their own lives, never truly owning anything, never free of the obligations placed upon them. 2. The political priests, masters of the illusion of choice. The devouring class does not rule through dictatorship, for dictatorships invite resistance. Instead, they rule through false democracy, through a system where the people are allowed to choose, but only between options that serve the same masters. The left and right pretend to oppose each other, but both answer to the same donors, the same interests, the same devouring class. The laws are rewritten, not to protect the people, but to ensure that the system is never truly threatened. Public debate is not about real solutions, but about managing public outrage, ensuring that the people remain emotionally engaged but politically powerless. The people are given the illusion of control, while the true rulers remain untouchable, never needing to answer for their actions, never suffering the consequences of their decisions. 3. The untouchable few, masters of escape. The devouring class does not fear rebellion, they fear having to stay behind when the collapse comes, and so, they have built a way out. They hoard wealth, not to invest, not to build, but to flee when the time comes. They do not plan for the future of civilization, they plan for their own survival. They buy land in remote locations, secure underground bunkers, make arrangements for when the system they control finally burns itself to the ground. They know the end is coming. They know the system is unsustainable. They just don't care, because they do not plan to be here when the fire finally reaches the gates. The endless extraction, the final collapse. The devouring class has perfected the art of sustaining collapse without ever allowing it to resolve. They ensure that the economy remains just functional enough that it does not implode, but never strong enough to truly empower the people. The people remain just poor enough that they have no choice but to obey, but never so poor that they have nothing left to lose. The crisis remains just severe enough to keep the masses desperate, but never urgent enough to spark full revolt. This is not mismanagement, it is by design. Because if the system ever truly stabilized, if the people ever truly found their footing, they would begin to see who has been feeding on them all along. The devouring class survives only as long as the world remains in a state of controlled decay, the endgame when there is nothing left to take. But extraction is not infinite. The parasites have drained civilization for generations, but the host is running dry. The wealth gap is so extreme that even the illusion of opportunity is fading. The people are beginning to realize that their suffering is not accidental, but engineered. The institutions that once sustained the illusion are beginning to crack under their own contradictions. And when the final resource is spent, when the final lie collapses, when the people finally see that there is nothing left to take, the devouring class will move on. They will retreat to their gated compounds, to their private islands, to their hidden fortresses, leaving behind a world they have drained to the bone. And for the first time in history, the people will see what remains when the parasites are gone. A world stripped bare, a civilization left to rot, and a choice. Rebuild from the ashes or become the next generation of parasites, repeating the cycle, devouring what little remains. Fourth, the collapse of the real, when nothing is true and everything is a performance. Reality was once a shared experience. It was something people could observe, discuss, and understand through reason, through evidence, through a common framework of meaning. It was imperfect, but it was real. Now the real is dissolving. What was once a world of facts, logic, and tangible experience has become a shifting illusion, a performance in which truth is no longer discovered but manufactured. The people do not live in reality. They live in narratives, in curated feeds, in competing fictions that shift and change as needed. History is rewritten in real time. Language is reshaped to fit ideology. Identity is no longer stable but fluid, endlessly revised, endlessly rebranded. The collapse of the real is not an accident. It is a necessary function of the system. A population that cannot distinguish fact from fiction, truth from propaganda, identity from performance, is a population that can be controlled absolutely. If nothing is real, then nothing can be questioned. The world is a simulation. The modern world does not function on reality. It functions on perception. Elections are not about governance but about optics. Activism is not about change but about visibility. Success is not about achievement but about the ability to construct an image of success. It is no longer important to be good, intelligent, or right, only to be perceived as such. Everything is a show, a spectacle where reality is dictated not by facts but by who controls the stage, who owns the cameras, who writes the script. And the people trapped inside this artificial world no longer know what is true. They do not believe. They perform belief. They do not feel. They perform emotions, waiting for validation, waiting for their scripted role to be acknowledged by the audience that watches them in the endless reality show that civilization has become. The manufactured confusion. Confusion is not a byproduct of the system, it is the goal. If the people are confused, they are passive. If they do not know what is true, they will obey whoever provides the most compelling illusion. And so reality is kept in a constant state of flux. Contradictions are normalized. What is true today is false tomorrow, and no one questions it. New crises are manufactured to keep people too distracted to think, too exhausted to resist. Loyalty is enforced not through belief but through fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of stepping outside the script, fear of being erased for questioning the performance. This is not control through force, it is control through uncertainty, where the people become so lost that they will cling to any illusion that promises stability. And so they surrender to the system not because they trust it, but because they no longer know what else to believe. The death of meaning. When reality collapses, so does meaning. The words people use, the identities they hold, the beliefs they follow, they are no longer connected to anything real. Love is no longer intimacy, but a transaction of validation. Identity is no longer personal, but a marketable aesthetic. Knowledge is no longer pursued, but replaced with slogans, with memes, with sound bites that create the illusion of understanding. The people no longer exist as individuals. They exist as characters, playing roles they did not choose, following scripts they did not write, performing in a world that no longer recognizes the difference between authenticity and illusion. And the system thrives in this post-reality world, because in a world where nothing is true, power is the only thing that remains real. The final illusion. The final stage of collapse is when the people no longer realize that anything has been lost. They will continue their performances. They will continue their rituals. They will continue living in a world that no longer exists, and they will never stop to ask, who is watching? Who is writing the script? And when the show is over, what will be left? Nothing. Because once reality collapses, there is no rebuilding it. There is only the illusion that remains. Fourth, the dissolution of contemplation. When thought is replaced by noise and silence becomes impossible. To control a population, it is not necessary to imprison them. It is not necessary to burn books. It is not even necessary to censor speech. All that is required is to drown out thought itself, to fill every empty moment with noise, to overwhelm the senses, to ensure that the people are never alone with their own minds. This is the final victory of the system, not through fear, not through violence, but through the erosion of contemplation, the destruction of stillness, the systematic annihilation of the space where independent thought might arise. It is not enough to control what people think. They must never have the time to think at all. The war on stillness. There was a time when silence was valued, when solitude was a source of strength, when contemplation was a sacred act, something reserved for the philosopher, the artist, the mystic, the seeker of truth. Now silence is a threat. A person who is still is a person who might reflect. A person who reflects is a person who might question. A person who questions is a person who might see the illusion for what it is. And so stillness must be eliminated. The people must be kept distracted at all times. Their thoughts must be interrupted before they can form. Their attention must be divided across 1,000 stimuli, ensuring that they never sink deep enough into a single idea to understand it fully. This is not an accident. It is a function of control, the architecture of distraction. The world has been designed to prevent contemplation. Every moment of life is filled with manufactured noise, ensuring that the people never stop consuming, never stop reacting, never stop performing. Endless notifications, breaking news, social media alerts, messages, updates, all designed to ensure that no thought lasts more than a few seconds before being replaced by another. The algorithmic feed, a constant shifting river of content that trains the mind to crave rapid, fragmented stimulation. Hyperconnectivity, where every space, every pause, every quiet moment must be filled with external input, ensuring that the self never has time to encounter itself. Even sleep is disrupted. Even dreams are invaded. There is no escape. The people are not forced to remain distracted. They are trained to fear what happens when the distractions stop. The fear of solitude. The greatest trick of the system is not that it has removed silence. It has made the people afraid of it. They fear being alone with their own thoughts. They fear the discomfort of unfiltered reality. They fear a moment of stillness because they have been conditioned to associate it with emptiness, with loneliness, with boredom. This is the final stage of control, when the people do not need to be silenced, because they will silence themselves. They will reach for their devices before they have a chance to reflect. They will seek out distraction before a single uncomfortable thought can form. They will choose stimulation over stillness, not because they are forced to, but because they no longer know how to live without it. The destruction of deep thought. Contemplation is not just silence, it is depth. It is the ability to think beyond the immediate, beyond the surface, beyond the spectacle. And it has been systematically destroyed. Knowledge is no longer explored. It is skimmed, summarized, and simplified into easily digestible pieces. Arguments are no longer debated. They are shouted in short bursts, designed for engagement rather than understanding. Ideas are no longer developed. They are flattened into slogans, memes, hashtags, reducible, repeatable, disposable. The people do not think deeply because they have lost the ability to do so. Their minds have been retrained, rewired for speed over depth, reaction over reflection, stimulus over substance. And a population that cannot think deeply cannot question deeply. A population that cannot question deeply cannot resist. The final collapse, when the self is lost, when contemplation dissolves, so does the self. Without stillness, there is no identity beyond the collective. Without reflection, there is no thought beyond what is provided. Without contemplation, there is no ability to resist the narratives that are imposed. The people do not know that they are lost. They do not know that their thoughts are no longer their own. They do not feel that anything is missing, because they have been trained to fear the very thing they lack. And so they continue, consuming, reacting, performing, moving, endlessly moving, never stopping, never thinking, never realizing that they have already been erased. And when the final moment of silence comes, when the distractions fade, when the noise dies, when the last performance ends, there will be nothing left. Because a mind that has been trained only to consume noise will not know how to create its own thoughts. A soul that has been fed only illusions will not know how to find the truth. And a people who have forgotten how to contemplate will never realize that they are already gone. Fourth, manufactured confusion. When chaos is a strategy, and truth becomes a casualty. Confusion is not an accident. It is not a byproduct of a chaotic world. It is manufactured. It is a strategy of control, designed to ensure that no one knows what is true, what is real, what matters. When the people are confused, they are passive. When they are overwhelmed, they submit. When they no longer trust their own thoughts, they seek guidance from the very system that has disoriented them. The destruction of clarity is not a failure of governance. It is the foundation of modern rule. A system that wants absolute control does not impose order. It ensures that no one else can create it. The weapons of confusion. The world has been flooded with contradictions, misinformation, and rapidly shifting narratives. Not to hide the truth, but to make truth irrelevant. Contradictory information, ensuring that no one knows what to believe. Moral relativism, ensuring that no one knows what is right. Overwhelming complexity, ensuring that no one has the time to question the system itself. This is not just confusion, it is designed instability. A world where people are always one step behind, one fact short, one realization too late. No one can resist what they cannot understand. The endless overload drowning thought in noise. The people are not given time to think, to reflect, to question. They are drowned in news, in crises, in narratives that change from week to week, day to day, hour to hour. The past is rewritten so that no one knows where they came from. The present is chaotic so that no one knows what is happening. The future is uncertain so that no one knows what to fight for. Instead of clarity, they are given a flood of conflicting voices. Every event has a dozen explanations, each equally plausible, each equally suspect. Every crisis has a dozen enemies, each equally responsible, each equally innocent. Every moral debate has a dozen perspectives, none of which can ever be resolved. The result? No one trusts their own perception. No one believes in objective truth. No one can agree on a shared reality. And so the people give up. They stop seeking answers. They accept whatever they are told, not because they believe it, but because they are too exhausted to question it. The illusion of choice, the reality of control. The people believe they have access to more information than ever before. They do not see that information without meaning is worse than ignorance. Every event is a spectacle, every crisis a performance. But who decides which ones matter? Every opinion is represented, every debate is endless. But who decides which voices are amplified? Every truth is subjective, every perspective valid. But who benefits when no truth can ever be agreed upon? The people are not being informed, they are being conditioned. A society where nothing is certain is a society where everything is permitted, for those who hold power. The manufacturing of crisis. Confusion alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by fear, urgency, and instability. And so the system creates perpetual crises, ensuring that the people are always reacting, always in a state of anxiety, always too distracted to ask who benefits from their fear. If the crisis is economic, the people work harder for less. If the crisis is social, the people police each other instead of questioning the system. If the crisis is ideological, the people burn their own history before they realize why it is being erased. Each crisis replaces the last before anyone has time to process what happened. The wars never end, they simply change locations. The enemies never disappear, they simply change names. The outrage never fades, it simply finds a new target. The people are not oppressed by force, they are distracted into submission, the disintegration of reality. The final stage of confusion is when the people no longer know what is real. Words lose meaning, until speech is nothing but a weapon for manipulation. Memory is rewritten, until the past exists only as a tool for the present. Identity is fragmented, until the people no longer know who they are, what they stand for, or what they believe in. And once that moment is reached, control is absolute. A people who cannot agree on truth cannot unite against power. A people who cannot define their beliefs cannot resist their programming. A people who cannot distinguish between reality and illusion cannot ever escape. They are not citizens, they are not thinkers, they are actors in a play they do not understand. The final deception, a war without end. The ultimate goal of manufactured confusion is to ensure that the people never stop fighting battles that do not matter. They will fight over words while their freedoms are taken. They will fight over identities while their rulers remain untouchable. They will fight over historical grievances while their future is quietly stolen. They will never notice the real enemy, because the real enemy is not the person who disagrees with them. The real enemy is the one who ensured that neither side would ever see clearly enough to understand who is pulling the strings. This is the perfection of control. To create a world so chaotic that the people can no longer imagine an alternative. To make them so confused, so lost, so exhausted that they will beg for the system to provide stability, never realizing that the system created the instability in the first place. And so they will embrace their chains, not because they are forced to, but because they no longer know how to live without them. Fourth, the end of democracy. When freedom becomes theater, and choice becomes an illusion, democracy was once the great ideal, the belief that the people, given the power to govern themselves, would create a society of fairness, of justice, of progress. It was the ultimate expression of human freedom, the promise that no ruler would stand above the will of the people. But democracy is dead, or rather, it has been transformed. It has been turned from a system of participation into a ritual of submission. It no longer exists to serve the people. It exists to convince them that they are still in control while ensuring that they never are. The end of democracy did not come through military coups or violent revolutions. It came through corruption disguised as governance, through choice without alternatives, through the slow erosion of power until voting became a meaningless performance, a ceremony where the outcome was predetermined, but the people still believed they had a say. This is not oppression by force. This is theater, where the people act out the script of democracy without realizing that the play ended long ago. The illusion of choice. The system no longer needs to remove democracy. It only needs to ensure that democracy no longer matters. The people are given candidates, but all serve the same interests. The people are given parties, but all are funded by the same class. The people are given debates, but all are scripted performances designed to distract, never to resolve. The people are not choosing their future. They are choosing which mask the system will wear while it continues down the same path. They are not voting for change. They are voting for which version of stagnation they prefer. And no matter who wins, the true rulers never change. The puppet government and the invisible power. The people still see politicians. They still see elections. They still see governments issuing laws, making speeches, promising action. But behind the theater, true power does not reside in the hands of the elected. The economy is controlled by corporations, who dictate policy through financial pressure. The culture is controlled by media conglomerates, who shape perception, who decide what is acceptable to believe. The government is controlled by bureaucratic machines, where decisions are made in rooms the public will never see. The politician is no longer a leader. He is an actor, a salesman, a face on a screen meant to calm the public, absorb their anger, direct their attention away from the true masters of the world. The people still believe they are free because they can watch the play unfold. They do not see that the audience was never meant to influence the script. The ritual of voting, a ceremony of obedience. The system no longer fears rebellion. It has turned democracy itself into a tool of control. Elections are not about policy. They are about loyalty, about ensuring that the people remain invested in a system that no longer serves them. Campaigns are not about governance. They are entertainment, political theater designed to distract the people from the fact that their vote has already been neutralized. The outcome does not matter. The act of participation itself is the victory for the system. Because as long as the people still believe in democracy, they will not demand something new. They will not reject the machine as long as they believe it can still be fixed. And so, they are led to vote for their own subjugation, because they do not see that voting itself has become a mechanism of control. The inverted tyranny. When democracy destroys freedom, the end of democracy did not bring dictatorship. It brought a new kind of tyranny, one that wears the language of freedom while ensuring that freedom is impossible. The people are not forced to obey. They are convinced that obedience is their will. The people are not silenced. They are flooded with so much noise that their voices no longer matter. The people are not denied rights. They are given rights so empty and meaningless that they serve no function. And when freedom becomes meaningless, democracy becomes the mechanism that destroys it. The people still go to the polls. The people still argue over policies. The people still believe they are participating in governance, but they are not ruling themselves. They are acting out the final days of a system that no longer functions, because it was never meant to function again. The true purpose of modern democracy. The people no longer live in a democracy. They live in a system that has preserved the rituals of democracy but none of its substance. The new democracy exists not to give power to the people but to keep them from realizing that they lost it long ago. It does not function as a system of governance. It functions as a mechanism of control. It does not protect the rights of the people. It protects the power of those who rule from the shadows. It does not allow real choice. It ensures that the illusion of choice is enough to keep the people passive. And as long as the people still believe that democracy is real, they will never revolt against the system that enslaves them. The final days of the illusion. But illusions do not last forever. There will come a time when the gap between the people and power grows too wide to ignore. There will come a time when the facade of choice no longer conceals the reality of control. There will come a time when the people finally ask, why do our votes never change anything? Why do the same policies continue, no matter who we elect? Why does every revolution lead back to the same rulers, the same system, the same broken world? And when they find the answer, when they finally see that democracy has become the greatest deception in human history, the system will no longer be able to contain them. Because the moment the people stop believing in the illusion, it collapses. And in its place, something new will rise, something free, or something far worse. The system knows this, it fears this, and so it will do everything it can to keep the illusion alive for as long as possible. Because when democracy ends, it will not be through revolution, it will be through revelation, and that revelation will be the system's undoing.